Henry Kissinger became a central figure in U.S. foreign policy, first as National Security Advisor and later as Secretary of State. His tenure was marked by secret negotiations, back-channel diplomacy, and a pragmatic approach to global affairs. My next guest was at his side, watching as history was being made. Here's my conversation with Winston Lord. I met Lord in New York City. Let's start with the scene setter, this secret trip, which of course led to the Nixon meeting with Mao. Kind of give us the background, how it all came together and the significance of it.
Nixon and Kissinger each came into office in 1969 wanting to open relations with China. Nixon had previewed this in a magazine article, and he wanted to bring China into the world system so there'd be more stability. On February 1 week after his inauguration, Nixon sent a memo to Kissinger saying, I want to get in touch with the Chinese. Shows you his priority. They faced two major obstacles. Obviously, we've been fighting each other in Korea with 22 years of mutual isolation and hostility. And we had absolutely no contact. So how are we going to even talk to each other to try to move ahead? We had to set up secret channels. We finally did this through the Pakistanis. And we had to prepare our publics and the world for the fact that we were moving in a different direction with regard to China. So we took some modest unilateral steps to show that we were willing to relax economic restrictions and try to move ahead. So that all led to the backdrop of setting up a secret trip to China. This was a big gamble for Nixon. He couldn't be sure it was going to work given the years of hostility. And so he wanted to, and the Chinese wanted to have someone come to China secretly first to see whether it was in both countries' advantage for Nixon to actually go and have a summit. So that's the background. And for me, it was particularly dramatic. My wife was born in Shanghai, so I was going back to her native land. We were, of course, about to set off a geopolitical earthquake and change the world system. Kissinger was about to meet with Zhou Enlai and other Chinese leaders. And so it was an extremely dramatic and nerve-wracking expedition. But the highlight of the trip for me was the fact that I ended up being the first American official into China after 22 years. We'd cut off relations in 1949 when the communists took over. So in his Pakistani plane with all the Pakistanis in the front, Kissinger was in the back. But as we got close to the Chinese border, I went to the front of the plane so that we go into China. I was ahead of Kissinger in the back of the plane and the first American into China.
Winston Lord was the Director of Policy Planning at the United States Department of State and Ambassador to China from 1985 to 1989. Let me ask about the pressure associated with this, because there's so much riding on this secret meeting, which eventually led to just an extraordinary chapter in history, both for China and the United States. Talk to me about the pressure of actually trying to come away with something tangible.
You know, people in retrospect seem to say, well, the opening of China was sort of inevitable, it would have happened. They forget it took a great deal of political courage by Nixon to authorize this. And I must say it was a big leap for the Chinese, although they had a much more controlled political system. So both sides were making a gamble. And so when we went to China with Kissinger in July 71, we had two objectives: to discuss a whole variety of international issues, Taiwan, Russia, Vietnam, the Middle East, Japan, and so on, and make sure there was enough common interests that we, despite our differences, could move ahead in our relationship. But secondly, we had to come up with a joint announcement of the meeting, which would serve the political purposes of both sides. So the Chinese wanted to make it look like Nixon was so anxious to come to China, they were doing him a favor and letting him come. We wanted to make it clear that the Chinese were so anxious to have Nixon that he was doing them a favor by coming. We met in between to make clear it was on both sides' interests. So as a result of the trip and the announcement, a few days after we left Pakistan, we set up the framework for Nixon to go to China in February 1972.
Talk to me about the significance of that meeting.
The Nixon-Mao meeting was one of the most important meetings in international affairs in the last 75 years, in my opinion. I'm a little biased because I was there secretly. The fact that they met signaled to the world that a new era was opening up. Not that we're going to become instant friends, but that we had enough in common, primarily balancing the Soviet Union, but for other reasons, that we could move ahead. Each side had prepared its public and the world for this change. The secret trip announcement, other steps we took. Mao had invited an American ping pong team to China a few months earlier, and that was a symbol of a new era. So it was set up that way. But still, it was important that the talks themselves established the right framework for the new relationship. Mao asked to see Nixon as soon as he arrived in Beijing, which is very unusual. Usually you wait till the last day and he puts his stamp of approval on a visit. By seeing him so quickly, he was indicating to his people and his cadre and to the world that he approved this visit from the very beginning. So just the early nature of the visit during the trip and then sitting down to each other. And so it really served its purpose, and it was one of the most dramatic meetings, as I say, in recent world history.
Henry Kissinger used covert diplomatic channels to engage with Chinese leaders, particularly Premier Zhou Enlai, bypassing traditional diplomatic routes. I think about being in my 30s and being there, witnessing history. I mean, it's such a heady time for you. Does the gravity of it all kind of hit you, or you're just thinking we're doing our work and hopefully it'll set the stage, or do you recognize this is going to change the course of history?
No, it's the latter. We recognize the geopolitical significance. And as a result of that trip, both sides achieved their objectives. For the Chinese, they figured by opening with us, other countries would follow suit and move toward China. And they did, Japan and Europe and so on. And they got into the United Nations. So they broke out of their diplomatic isolation. And if they needed some movement on Taiwan, they made major concessions in terms of waiting on Taiwan, more than we did. But we made some gestures in the communique, so they got something on Taiwan. So from their standpoint, the meeting was a success. But from our standpoint, it was equally a success. We made major progress in arms control, on agreement with respect to Berlin. And then we had our own summit with the Soviets. Within a couple of months, this was all achieved. This dramatic opening with a quarter of the world's people put some of this in perspective and lifted their spirits. There's greater stability in Asia. So the Chinese like to talk about, in negotiations, going for a win-win situation. This was clearly a win-win situation. Both sides achieved their major goals.
Henry Kissinger was instrumental in negotiating the Shanghai Communique, which established the foundation of China U.S. relations, including the One China policy. And the Shanghai Communique, leading up to that, how instrumental was Kissinger in getting that, done?
Well, of course, Kissinger was absolutely crucial. And I know this firsthand because I helped Kissinger draft almost all these memos and took the notes at these trips. So when we went to China in October 71, this was after the secret trip, we went publicly to set up the logistics for the summit, like the itinerary and media arrangements and so on. We started to negotiate what became the Shanghai Communique. Each side has to state its positions, even and especially when they oppose each other, whether it's philosophic or specific issues. And that communique was very skillful, and I give the Chinese credit for this unusual approach. There's never been a communique like that. And even today, 50 years later, people are still referring to it. Most diplomatic communiques sink without a trace within days.
What's it like, though, to be around such superior intellects? As a young man watching these, amazing intellects and the back and forth, what was that like?
Well, I was extremely privileged. And as I said, as special assistant, I got to be part of all the key negotiations. I was the one person that Kissinger would pair with experts on an issue so that he could have someone else have a global perspective how all the pieces fit together. So I was not only involved with China, but I spent even more time in the secret negotiations with the Vietnamese, was on the Middle East shuttles, and the meetings with the Soviets, including a summit in May 1972. So I was really privileged not only to learn from Kissinger, but also to learn observing other major leaders. And I'd have to say I agree with Kissinger that Zhou Enlai was the single most impressive. The test of pure brilliance of exchanges, those between Kissinger and Zhou Enlai were absolutely amazing. And I was privileged to be in every one for hundreds of hours, as well as 5 meetings with Mao and all the meetings with Deng Xiaoping. So yeah, this was dramatic and it helped to shape my own strategic thinking. I will say it was very demanding, not only the hours, but Kissinger's pursuit of excellence. So I was sort of quitting about once a week, given the hours and the fact he almost never praised you. He would just ask for better work. I will say one thing, he didn't like yes men or yes women. I was first hired by him and I was sitting across from the West Wing in another part of the White House and wrote some memos criticizing some or asking questions about some of his policies. And he hired me because of those memos, not despite them, as his special assistant. But he stretched my patience, he stretched my nerves, but he also stretched my capabilities and my horizons. So I'll be forever grateful.
Tracing his trajectory over all those years and his relationship with China, how did he evolve? And he was always kind of that treasure. It didn't matter who was in the White House. They wanted to pick his brain after he got back from China.
As remarkable as Kissinger's government career was, equally remarkable was what he did after his career was over. He was in government 8 years. Most cabinet officials have no influence or no impact as soon as they leave office. His continuing impact and influence for 50 years after leaving office was absolutely amazing, not to mention what he could do as he got older. And so he always was at the call of presidents of both parties. He would make sure they called him. He didn't try to angle to get in there. He was always careful publicly. He would write tough issues and even disagree with ongoing policies, but he did it in a very respectful manner and never personally attacked the incumbent president, even if he disagreed. He would give his views in private. And if he disagreed with issues, he felt an obligation to speak out, but it was always in sort of a supportive, nonpartisan way. Sometimes some of us would get annoyed because we thought he should have been tougher on whatever president it was. Also, foreign leaders always wanted to see him. Whenever they came to the U.S., they would meet with him. He would travel all the time talking to foreign leaders. He went to China, I would say, 100 times. I mean, that's just unbelievable. Meanwhile, he was running a business, consulting around the world. He was writing books, giving interviews. It's just amazing performance.
Was there a moment where Kissinger ever went, ay, 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 or just moments where he kind of let down his guard as a diplomat and kind of shared with you, thoughts like that?
Well, many times Kissinger and I was very fortunate to be with him a lot, all the time, would share either embarrassments or actual angst over setbacks. The most famous one was when we went to Saigon to talk to the South Vietnamese government about the breakthrough we just made in negotiations with the North Vietnamese. And we thought that President Thieu, since we're keeping him in power and we fought off the North Vietnamese demands to get rid of him, and we refused to do that, we thought he would be satisfied with the outcome of the negotiations. And he just ripped us apart. And this was in October 1972. And so we shared tremendous depression and angst, and including the coming months, we went back to negotiate with North Vietnamese. We finally made progress and had a deal, but for a while, it was very depressing. So, yeah, we had great moments of depression as well as exhilaration.
Yeah. Well, what a storied career. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.